Are we live? I think we are. Hey, everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ and Friends. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and today is the second Wednesday of the month, which means it's time for Hammer Your Way to Health with none other than Dr. Alan Goldhamer, who is here to answer your questions. Please welcome him back. Hello, Dr. Goldhamer. How are things at the TrueNorth Health
Hello,
Center?
AJ. Doing
How are
good.
things going? I always wondered, what's it? I mean, I've been a guest, I would call it presenter at True North for many years, sometimes up to several weeks when you used to have the holiday extravaganza. But what's it like to work at True North? I mean, you've worked there, what, 40 years?
Yeah, so far. Yeah, no, it's great. There's a lot of advantages and conveniences. One thing is you never have to worry about any shopping or chopping or hassle in terms of getting healthy food available, and you never have to wonder what did they put in that stuff. Is there a bunch of salt, oil, sugar, or animal foods contaminating the food? So that's certainly a convenience. It's
So
nice because
the staff gets to eat there for free, right?
oh yeah, the staff and many of our staff live on site. So for many of them, all of their meals and whatnot are provided. We have a historically a really low turnover. It's kind of like the firm, once people start working there, they don't tend to leave. But now we're getting bigger, in part because of you and your patients. And so what we need to do now is we need to add some new people. We've added a couple new medical doctors recently, which has been good, but we need to add a new additional chef to help Ramses and Mauricio. And so, if you know anybody that's a vegan SOS-free chef that's, experienced in production cooking and particularly we'd like to get some diversity in there, somebody that's got some background in Asian or Indian cooking. So if you know somebody that's a production chef with some experience that wants to do something worthwhile with their life and guarantee going to heaven instead of hell, they should call me and come and work at.
Where'd you go? Can't hear you anymore. Hello? Hello, hello? I cannot hear you. I think you're frozen, Dr. Goldhammer. Oh no. Hello? Shoot, is he frozen? This is just crazy. Is he frozen for you guys as well? You'd have to comment in the chat. I'm going to text him. Charles? Frozen. I can't hear or see him. Can anybody see or hear him? Why is this happening lately? We don't do that many shows. Oh man, he's gone. Oh boy. So it was on his end, guys. Sorry about that. Well, I will talk to you for a minute. I'm glad that you couldn't see him as well, only because then I know it wasn't me. Hopefully he'll log right back on because we have some great questions for today. Call Dr. Joel Furman to come on the show or just to call him. He'll be on the show soon. He said we're going to get his mother on, Dr. Joel Furman, who's like in her 90s and thriving. She's just not in California right now, so we're waiting for her to come back. But okay, what do we do? Because I the kind of questions he has I can't answer, so I will call him. Oh, that's not good. I'm sorry about this, you guys. I could log off and log back on. Where'd he go? Okay, let me see. Goldhammer. I get to call him, so let's see where he is. The problems with live. That's why so many creators just do recorded, I suppose.
Try to log back on, AJ.
Are you at home or at the center?
I'm at home. I'm just trying to log back on. I just got knocked off.
Yeah, because the last thing you said, and then it was frozen.
Just
Okay.
let me, I'll just go on here. I'll be back in a second.
Okay, bye. All right. So yes. If there are any questions I can answer, not obviously not on therapeutic water fasting, but I have been at True North many, many times as well, actually I think only 3 times as a patient, but many, many times as a guest presenter where I would go for 1 to 5 weeks for special programs. I just actually did that for my vacation in August because one of the presenters, the regulars there, was doing a water fast. So I did I was there 8 days, and 6 of the days I did classes, three cooking and three uh, PowerPoints. So it's a really fun place. And I don't know if you know this, but you can watch everything. You don't have to be a patient. You just register for a free, it's called TrueNorth Health TV account. We've been watching this for years, especially Monday at 2 o'clock when Dr. Goldhamer speaks for 2 hours. It is a hoot. Ah, let's see. So my recent fast, I haven't been able to fast since. Oh, here he is. My last time there was as to work, not as a fast. So I did do two medically supervised fasts there. So hopefully he's back and he's working. That's why it's important to get the phone number of all of your guests in case this happens. Hello.
Hi, AJ.
Hey, was it something I said? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I thought you just hung up on me
No,
after I.
you said something about so you're looking for a new chef, not because you're
Oh,
replacing
yeah.
Mauricio or Ramses, but you're looking for a full-time chef. So if anybody
Yeah.
knows anybody, but let me clarify, do they have to be vegan and SOS free? Because if they're a great chef, they can learn this. Isn't it better to have a great chef than somebody that's just vegan and SOS free that maybe isn't really a great chef? Because
Well,
Ramses was not.
we need a great chef that's willing to limit themselves to vegan SOS free cooking. Ramses wasn't vegan and SOS free when he first came to work for us. In fact, he kind of walked out of the room when he started interviewing him because the first thing I told him is it had to be vegan, and he said he knew vegetarian cooking, and I said not vegetarian, vegan. And then he said, oh, well, he could adapt to that. And then I told him no oil. And he said, well, what about olive oil? And I said, no oil. He said, okay. And then I said, no sugar. And he said, what about maple syrup and, honey? And I said, nothing. And then I said, no salt. And then he walked out. But
How'd
then he
you get?
came back and he said he'd worked for us for 6 months while he tried to find another job. And that was like 20 years ago. So,
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. So if anybody knows
yeah.
anybody, let us know because it's a really fun place to work and Santa Rosa is a great place to live.
Yep.
All right. Well, if you give this in a written form, we'll send it out to our mailing list. So,
Yeah,
and
I've got it. I just got it put together. I'll get it you a copy of it.
that sounds great. And maybe we'll be able to find somebody. I know people that fit the bill that are Asian chefs. One is Chinese, one is Japanese, but they don't want to move where they live. They would come and train and do a guest thing, but they are not looking for full time.
No, they have to be willing to live in beautiful Santa Rosa, California, which interestingly enough is the best place in the country to live, which is why we're there. It's got the best overall weather, air quality, ability to grow a diverse variety of fruits and vegetables. It's just a fabulous place to live. We've been so happy there for the last 40 years. That was really one of the many really good decisions that we made.
Nice. Well, it's a beautiful place, and I recommend people go there. And if they can't go, at least watch the stream, which you can do every day for free. So I'm wearing my Vegas hat for a couple of reasons. One, I'm going back to Vegas this weekend to meet with the hotel, thank them, and to talk a little bit about next year's menu since I've been invited back to host. And the first question is from Dixie, and she wants to know what you personally like best about the plant-powered party.
Well, one thing was it was so novel because you had vegan SOS free food available. And it's so unusual to be able to even going to vegetarian events or whatever, they tend to be salt, oil, and sugar saturated because the people that are preparing food aren't really familiar with making food healthy. And so to be able to go and find a variety of interesting foods that were completely health promoting was really encouraging. The other thing that I like, there's a lot of interesting activities in Vegas. Like, for example, they have the Sphere, which is kind of a novel experience, and they have other activities that are, unusual that you wouldn't normally be able to participate in. So I think it adds a dimension to, the event. And also, you got a pretty big audience. I mean, it was amazing how many people were there. It was interesting to see people from all over the place came to that event. I imagine next year will be even more successful, given the fact that I think people had a really good time.
Thank you. Yeah, and I agree. I don't, did you get a chance to go to the Sphere, Dr. Goldhammer? It was
I
incredible.
didn't go to this for this time, but my wife went last time she was in Vegas and she said it was really fabulous.
Yeah, it really is. That's one reason that people should go to Vegas and mark your calendar now for Labor Day 2026, September 4 to 6. Okay, and I thought the chef did remarkably well because he's done vegan, but he's never done SOS free. And for the first time to create that menu, I really applaud him.
Yeah, I have a suspicion that he got a little help from you, but that's just my suspicion.
Just a few recipes. He was he was the chef at the Bellagio for like 18 years. So anyway, a good chef is a good chef. So great. So our next question is, Dr. Goldhammer, do you
Yeah, I
think
wonder if he'd like to move to California.
gosh, I think he's probably got a pretty good deal there. I'll ask him on Monday because I am going. So, Dr. Goldhammer, when we were at the Tuscany, the marquee said opening September 8th, which was 1 week after our conference, Rich Little. And when I was little, I used to love to watch him on the Tonight Show. And so that's the other reason I want to go back is, he's 86. So I don't know if he's going to be there next year.
Yeah, well, let's hope he's eating healthfully so he's got a good chance.
So you know who he is, right? He's an impressionist, right?
Comedian, yeah.
Well, an impressionist and a comedian too, and this is my impression of Dr. Goldhammer smiling. Okay, and this is my impression of Dr. Goldhammer laughing. See, I'm an impressionist. Okay, next
Very
question.
good.
Thank
Very
you.
good,
I got
Adrian.
it. I got it nailed down. All right. So, do you think it's necessary for a healthy person to do a week-long water fast? For example, some people might think they need to do that yearly.
Well, we don't know. I mean, that's the subject of our upcoming research is does periodic short-term fasting help delay death and debility? And we think the answer is going to be yes. What we practice is that for healthy people, we recommend a fast once a year for a week as a diagnostic as well as preventative tool. It turns out, AJ, that when healthy people fast, the magnitude of their effects on, say, cardiometabolic events and other things is actually even bigger than sick people. The people that may get the most benefit of fasting are actually healthy people that are using it preventatively. It turns out it may be better to prevent things than wait until you get sick and debilitated and then try to reverse them. Even though we do a pretty good job of reversing a lot of diseases of dietary excess, like high blood pressure and diabetes and autoimmune diseases, and even conditions like lymphoma, the best strategy is probably not getting them in the first place. And that would be diet, sleep, exercise, and we think periodic fasting.
Nice. But most people don't come there preventatively. Would you agree?
Right now, a small percentage of our patients come preventively, but we do have people, many of which have been coming every year for up to 40 years. And it's interesting, those people are often now in their 80s, and their story's always the same. It's everybody they know is dead. And sometimes even their kids. It's really tragic when people are outliving their children because their children are not following a health promoting diet and lifestyle. So in their 60s, they're having heart attacks and strokes, whereas people living healthfully are in their 80s and still appear to be doing very well.
Wow, thank you. So the next question is from Barb, and she says, Dr. Goldhammer, do you personally take an iodine supplement or seaweed? And if not, can we get enough from our diet with regular grocery store food and produce, which is mostly from California, if we eat a lot of vegetables?
Yeah, well, fortunately, the soils in the coast have iodine, and so your vegetables are contain iodine. If you want to supplement iodine, you can certainly include small amounts of sea vegetables like nori, which is very low in sodium, or kelp, things of this nature. So if you use a little bit of sea vegetables in your salads or your soups and whatnot, you probably are not going to have to be too concerned about iodine. If you get f vegetables from foods, the soils that contain iodine, you're not going to have to worry about iodine so much. But let's say, for example, you lived in Minnesota and you had to garden and you ate all of your food from Minnesota soil. Minnesota soil is deficient in iodine unless you supplement it. And so you would eventually develop iodine deficiency, which is why many years ago they decided to supplement iodine for everybody by putting it in salt because they figured, I guess, that was the one thing they knew everybody would eat lots of. and they would get iodine supplement that way. So we don't recommend the use of salt. So therefore, you're certainly not getting iodized salt. For most people, it's not an issue. If it is an issue, fortunately, it's very simple to supplement iodine. Or as we said, add sea vegetables to the diet, which are extremely rich, particularly things like kelp have massive quantities of iodine. You need only just a trace in order to meet your needs.
But isn't the only way to test if you have enough iodine is through that 24-hour urine test?
Yeah, there's some testing that you can do, but also if people were having problems with goiters or other things, you'd certainly be concerned about, iodine levels. Again, it's really not a big issue for people eating a diverse amount of vegetable foods that are grown on iodine adequate soils.
Thank you. So Laura would like to know, she said a 60-year-old lost her mom to rectal cancer and her younger sister now has colon cancer. She believes a whole food, plant exclusive diet has no more benefit than a diet high in animal products to protect from cancer or any disease. Other than diet, she has a healthy lifestyle and BMI. How would you advise her?
Well, I advise you to go on a whole plant food, SOS-free diet and eliminate all the meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, and processed foods so she can reestablish a healthier gut microbiome and have a better chance of managing or preventing her conditions. The idea that high animal food diets don't increase the risk of your risk for colon cancer, I think, is a mistake. I think there's good evidence to suggest that higher animal food intake does, in fact, increase your risk. And we know that people that are eating an animal-rich diet have completely different microbiome than people that are eating plant-based diets. And so, good suggestion that perhaps getting rid of the high animal fat, high animal protein diets might go a long way at reducing the incidence and certainly improve the management of patients with these conditions.
If people are on a high animal protein diet, they're often on a low fiber diet.
Yeah, that's another very important point. These diets that we're advocating are high in vegetable cellulose and fiber that normalize bowel function as well as reduce the risk of the excess bile acid production, that yellow-green caustic material that's thought to be inflammatory and irritating, that myceliates fat. So if you look at meat eaters versus plant eaters have significantly lower circulating levels of that substance. It's probably one of the components in increased risk for colon-related disease.
Thank you. The next question is anonymous. The question is, I am a 75-year-old woman who has been medicated for depression most of my adult life. Can depression be cured?
Well, I don't think it can be cured any more than obesity can be cured. You can lose the weight and keep it off, but if you go back to doing the things that cause it, it's going to come back. Same thing with high blood pressure, diabetes, and cancer. So the question is, can depression be managed, and can it be managed more effectively without medications than with it? There's an interesting book addressing that, Anatomy of an Epidemic, which claims that the use of serotonin uptake inhibitors like Prozac, introduced in 1986, have dramatically increased the likelihood of acute depressive residual problems from depression. It used to be about 5% of acute depressive episodes resulted in disability, and now it's somewhere around 60%. And this author is citing literature that suggests that a big part of that is deactivating the D2 receptors in people's brains by giving them serotonin uptake inhibitor medications. That when you stop those drugs, the first thing that happens is you experience acute depression and anxiety, which tends to fool people into thinking that they have some biochemical deficit in their brain and they have to be on those drugs the rest of their life. That's great news for the pharmaceutical company, not so good for the individual, since there is no biochemical deficiency that's been identified with depression or anxiety. And as a consequence, the drug that's supposed to correct this purported deficiency can't and doesn't work long term. It's a bad long-term solution. So what we suggest is that instead of going on antidepressant medications, we start addressing the reason why people are depressed and anxious. And those things are varied and can be diverse, including sleep deprivation, lack of exercise, inappropriate diet, and a life that sucks. And so we want to try to, make life work better. And sometimes you need help with that. That's why there are people like Dr. LIsle that does cognitive behavioral therapy that can help you, reposition how you view stresses in life, or how, like he explained to me, how you can manipulate other people so they don't bother you as much. Once I heard that, I became a big proponent of psychotherapy. If it's about manipulating other people's behavior so they don't bother you so much, I can relate to that. So the idea is there's a lot of things you can do to make yourself feel bad, and there's a lot of things you can do to make yourself feel good. There's causes of depression, and there's things you can do to overcome depression. But one of the solutions isn't, for most people, long-term use of serotonin uptake inhibitor medication.
Well,
What we do is we'll use fasting to kind of reboot the gut microbiome. And we know that serotonin and dopamine and a lot of these active neurochemical components are actually produced in the digestive system. We work on a diet, a whole plant food SOS-free diet. We get people exercising enough, but not too much. And then also take a look at people's lives. People are under too much stress. And some of that stress, they may not be able to do anything about, but others they can do a lot about. For example, you don't have to watch the news every day. You can be a fully informed citizen, but limit how much exposure you get to all the stressful issues that are going on around the world. You don't need to be bathing yourselves in desperation and despair every day, all day long. And so, focus on addressing the things that you can do something about and stop spending so much time and energy on things that you can have no effect on whatsoever.
she says that she's 75 and been medicated most of her adult life. So SSRIs weren't always available. If
Yeah. Well, the other thing is when you've been on these toxic medications for a long period of time, you have to be very careful in how they're withdrawn. If you withdraw too quickly, you'll get an acute depressive or anxious episode. So it's good to work with a doctor that's familiar with people actually getting well. I recommend the doctors on our telemedicine site at TrueNorthHealth.com. These are doctors that are used to actually people getting well, and they can be very helpful to you. And in terms of dealing with the causes of depression that have to do with psychological issues, the person I know that's really the best at helping people is Dr. LIsle, who does a really good job of helping people, you know, uh, use these kind of cognitive behavioral approaches to improve their outlook and their function.
Thanks. Oh, but you can't water fast if you're on these drugs, correct?
Well, what we would do is we would either do a modified fast on the drugs as we're weaning the medication, or we would wean the medications carefully. And then when it's appropriate, then we would undertake water-only fasting. The good news, though, is just adopting a whole plant food SOS-free diet will immediately begin the process of, improving a person's health. So as long as you're slow and steady about the thing, you can often be successful.
Great. Thank you. Sylvie would like to know, does water fasting help with lymphedema? And what else
Yeah.
do you recommend for people with lymphedema that could help them?
Well, all the healthful habits improve the body's ability to compensate for lymphedema, which can be secondary to a number of variables. But yes, we have found significant improvement clinically with patients that have, uh, there's two related words. Lymphedema is one where the lymph gland is congested, and there's also lipedema, which is a type of inflammatory fatty deposit, both of which can be helped using this combination of diet, sleep, exercise, and where it's appropriate, medically supervised water-only fasting.
Do you want to explain the difference between the two demas that you just talked about?
Well, one is a congestion of the lymph itself, and the other has to do with inflammatory fatty material that accumulates.
Okay. I see. I know. I always hear about some special massage that people with one of those
For
get.
lymph edema, for the lymph, you can do lymph massage. But again, the most effective thing that I've seen is fasting. It just reboots the whole system. It decongests the area and can reduce some of the inflammation that goes along with it.
I just hear about a lot of people undergoing cancer treatment, acquiring that
Yeah,
disease.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is from Jackie. I am a 10-year low-fat vegan who recently had a severe gallbladder attack. I'm receiving conflicting information about gallstone causes, high versus low fat, and treatments, flushing, bile salts, healthy fats. I want to avoid surgery and future attacks. What advice can you provide?
Well, there are different types of situations that occur with gallstones. In general, though, when you think about bile as the material that emulsifies fat and breaks down fat. And so it's not shocking that when people are on higher fat diets, higher protein diets, they tend to, and sometimes form stones that can become obstructive. And sometimes you'll get the bile acid material backing up into the pancreas, and it can cause pancreatitis and all kinds of secondary, uh, often painful challenges. The most important thing with gallstones is preventing them by not being on a high animal fat, high animal protein, high fat diet. Once they form, it can be problematic. Sometimes, in fact, I think as much as 20% of people, if you image them, have evidence of gallstones. But most of them stay adhered into the wall. They aren't necessarily symptomatic unless they try to pass. You don't necessarily need to do anything therapeutically about them. But if they do pass, and they can be very painful, or if they're too large, they can become obstructive. And in very rare situations, it can even result in the need to do surgery. Um, the good news is when people adopt healthy diets and use fasting and the things that we're approaching, oftentimes we can bring the acute inflammation down, and then people are willing to eat a healthy diet. They'll stay in good control. The problem is if they go out and have a bunch of French fries and stuff, it may cause a precipitation. And then doctors will tell them, well, if you have your gallbladder out, then you can eat French fries again. But it turns out that that's not really what happens. What really happens is you remove that filter, the bile squirts directly into the duodenum. Those are the people that end up with duodenal cancer and other problems. And oftentimes they have less effective digestion than they did even before they had the gallbladder removed. So if eating French fries is your main goal, I wouldn't count on cholecystectomy as being an answer to your problem.
But when she talked about flushing, isn't there like this thing where people think if they drink like olive oil, it gets the gallstones to come out?
Yeah, what really happens is they drink olive oil and they form and they make soap balls. And if you take those quote gallstones, they actually melt back into olive oil. But that's just hokum and hooey. So they make their liver throw up and their gallbladder throw up, and they think that that somehow is going to cleanse them. But it's not been my experience that that's an effective long-term strategy for dealing with this condition.
Great, thank you. One more of previously submitted questions, and if you want your question to go to the top of the queue, consider joining the Chef AJ and Friends community. We'll have time to take some live questions today. But this last one from Heidi, can you please ask the brilliant Dr. Goldhamer if it's really necessary for whole food plant-based SOS-free senior women to increase their daily plant protein intake to 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram, or is the zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein still okay to be eating daily?
Yeah, I don't think you need to increase your protein. You're still looking at 10% of your calories from uh, to be from protein. And the idea that you have to significantly increase protein based on aging, I think, is a error of attribution. Um, if you increase your activity, you increase your caloric level, you'll increase your protein intake, but it's still going to be in that 10% of calories from protein. So the idea of taking in extra protein is very popular, but I think it's also going to turn out to be a long-term very detrimental. So I want a protein adequate diet, but not excessive. Same thing with fat. We're talking 10% of calories from protein, around 15 to 18% of calories from fat, and the balance from whole plant food carbohydrates.
Well, a lot of the vegan people that speak say that as a senior, you need more protein.
And you may need slightly more protein, but not enough to significantly change your diet, because the reality is that most of the people on these vegan diets are getting too much protein anyway. So the argument that that person ideal protein might be slightly higher, as they age, doesn't change the reality that they're already getting adequate or excessive protein just as a consequence of their whole plant food diet. If you ate nothing but brown rice and broccoli, you'd be getting about 80 grams of protein on 2,000 calories, which really is too much. You want to dilute that down, and that's without any nuts or seeds or beans or any of the other very proteinaceous rich foods that we typically are including on these diets.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Susanna. Where do you see the future of fasting and lifestyle medicine heading in the next 10 years?
Well, it's interesting. I watched Walter Longo change the face of fasting discussion amongst medical doctors when he introduced Prolon. which is an expensive product that people can use in lieu of eating 5 days a month. He didn't ask people to change their diets the other 25 days. They just didn't eat their normal crap 5 days a month and was able to demonstrate evidence of improvement. So just not eating your conventional diet 15% of the time seems to be enough to make a difference. But the big thing that Walter Longo did is he introduced this product and it monetized fasting. And you went from no medical doctor ever discussing fasting to 10,000 offices selling Prolon. So I think the future is if you figure out how to make them money, then it'll probably become popular. Because apparently that's what's motivating uh, many medical offices is the economic realities of how you sell the product. For example, it's become very popular to get into oncology or rheumatology because now oncologists and rheumatologists have opened what are called infusion centers, where they can sell you your cancer drugs or your autoimmune drugs. And so the more they sell you, the more they pump into you, the more they make. And it's made those professions very lucrative because they've gone back into hawking the products that they're pitching. A lot of people don't realize that, but in fact, in reality, that's what's going on. And so those treatments and those professions have become very lucrative.
Why are they so expensive? I mean, certain medications, like if somebody needs prednisone or levothyroxine, they're very, very cheap. It could be like, $2 a month. Why are chemotherapy drugs so expensive?
Well, whenever drugs are still on patent, they can charge basically whatever they want. I'll give you an example. One of my patients explained to me that their company used to make a drug to treat hepatitis C that was not effective. People would take it for 5 years, they'd eventually die. And they would get about $20,000 a year for the drug. And then they came up with the new drug that actually works, Harvoni, that they give to vitamin C patients. There's a 95% resolution rate. And they charge $100,000 for it. So it's $5,000 a pill. And I was complaining that, it seems excessive to charge $100,000 for a little bottle of pills. And they were talking about, well, it costs a lot of money, a lot of research money to come up with it. But I pointed out that, isn't a lot of that research money paid by the government, by taxpayers? But anyway, the point he was making was they used to get $100,000 over 5 years for a drug that didn't work. And now they get $100,000 a year for a drug that does work. Why shouldn't they be able to make the same $100,000 that they made before just because they came up with a drug that works? Because remember, when you take that drug, after 20 days, you're done. You don't get to take it anymore. You don't need it anymore unless you go out and have, exposure and get hepatitis C again. And so why should they be punished for coming up with a drug that actually works? And, from their perspective, it makes a little bit of logical sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems like that shouldn't be allowed, though. Okay, here's a question from Anonymous. How can people break free from cravings from ultra-processed food, even when they've been on a whole food plant-based diet for many months?
Well, even for many years, the truth is these addictions are very, very powerful. And that's why it's, like alcoholics, you don't tell them we'll only have alcohol on celebration days, like once a week or once a day or once a month. We tell alcoholics they need to stop drinking because they're not capable of regulating the chemicals that are filling their brain. So they need to not drink at all. And we know from experience, if they start having a little of this and a little of that before long, a little becomes a lot, and now they've got a problem. But we lie to overweight people and tell them they can eat little bits of this and little bits of that because it's celebration or something. But the reality is it doesn't work. They end up scaling back, and that's why recidivism rate is so high. That's why it's less likely for a doctor to help a person lose weight and keep it off than they are to help an alcoholic quit drinking. The recidivism rate is so high, and in part because of the way we try to manage obesity, where we continue to have little treats and special things that feed our addiction. Just like some people can have a drink and not become a drunk. If you're a drunk, it's not you. You're not that person. And some people could eat a little of this and not necessarily gain weight. But if you're overweight, it's likely you're not the person that can be fooling your nervous system with those chemicals. And so I would argue that the best strategy is to really eliminate the meat, fish, valley, dairy products, low salt, and sugar, and eat an exclusively whole plant food diet. So fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And sometimes for those of us that have vulnerable nervous systems, it's easier to do that than it is to kind of continually tease yourself with the drug-like effect of the ultra-processed foods.
But fasting can help, right?
Yeah, fasting is a good way of breaking the cycle, but fasting can't keep you from going back to eating the foods later. So you still have to have a degree of consciousness about it, and you have to create a safe environment. And you need support because just like going to the Betty Ford Center for 30 days doesn't keep people from drinking again. It might give them tools to help resist it, but you still have to live in the world and make decisions every day. That's why we don't tell our newly minted alcoholics to go get a job as a bartender. Now, it's true, I have alcoholic patients that are successful bartenders, but they've been established in their sobriety a long period of time. It's not the first job you would give them. And just like you shouldn't overweight people, it'd be easier if they didn't have to go to work and be walking around big bowls of candy all day long and have tremendous social pressures to participate in health compromising behaviors. It would be better if they were in a supportive environment. It's just not always possible. By the way, that also includes a supportive environment in your house. You don't send an alcoholic home and have open bottles of liquor all over the house. And you shouldn't be sending people home who are trying to make diet and lifestyle changes and have unlimited temptation at their disposal in their home. They need to have a safe home, a safe environment. So it doesn't mean everybody else in your home has to be eating perfectly, but at least they need to give you the respect to try to create a safe environment for you. And it's just like you would if a person came home from um, uh, alcohol treatment, you wouldn't expect to, keep temptation in front of them as a constant reminder of their challenges.
Thank you. Yeah, because even if their home is clean, the world isn't.
No, it's hard enough, dealing with the world. You don't need to deal with it at home either.
Yeah, that's why they should go take that job opening at True North.
Well, yeah, if they're a chef and they're experienced in doing SOS-free cooking, this is going to be a really unique opportunity to do really worthwhile food development and preparation and education. The chefs at True North not only do production cooking, but they're also an active part of our educational program. And that's part of what we're looking to expand, not just more varieties of interesting foods, but also expanding our health education outreach. And also, I think it'll create a little bit of heightened interest within the staff themselves. That, chefs tend to be competitive. And so when we have multiple chefs competing, it helps them all rise to their height. I mean, you've seen that when you've been there doing the cook-offs, AJ, and you come in and then everybody like steps up the game trying to keep up with you.
Well, if I wasn't so old, I would take that job. I think it would be really, really fun to work there. So,
Yeah. Well, I
yeah,
think you got a lot of important things that you're doing right now, AJ. So
thank you. Okay, so Debbie says, does fasting help with resetting the body in its hunger and satiety signals?
yeah, it's really amazing. It's one of the surprising things to people is when people are fasting, they're not hungry. After 2 or 3 days, most people experience a complete blunting of hunger. It's a fasting blunting. In fact, they'll go to cooking classes and they'll come to the dining room and socialize with people even though they haven't eaten for days or weeks. And you think that would be so difficult, but for most people, it's really not too much of a problem. It's one of the fasting effects. In fact, that's how fasting mimicking diets try to mimic fasting as they get people on high fat diets. So there's no carbohydrates, and then they get into ketosis, and that blunts hunger. It's just not a healthy long-term strategy. But in fasting, it is one of the effects of fasting is that hunger tends to go away. And then after fasting, it's a profound rebooting of the satiety mechanisms. In fact, people coming off the fast think they would have such a huge appetite, but they find they're relatively easily satiated. And they don't have to keep overeating like they used to in order to be all satisfied, that their satiation and their actual needs begin to be approximated. So it's really one of the benefits of fasting is helping recalibrate satiety. And we've even done a study that showed your actual taste changes in fasting. Your sensitivity to sweet and salt is enhanced. And so, like when you eat chard after fasting, it tastes very salty. whereas you wouldn't maybe have noticed it, coming off a conventional diet.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how food tastes so good after a fast. Anything, zucchini,
Well,
watermelon.
what happens is food tastes like they always taste. It's just you haven't lost your edge.
That's funny. Yep. Okay. So here's a question from Kevin. How much impact do added oils have on cardiovascular health compared to other processed foods?
Well, that's a really good question. And I don't know if that's been well quantified. Like it's like asking what's worse, dying from drowning or dying from burning to death? You can argue that, well, the burning to death, usually you get knocked out by the smoke before your actual tissue is turned into char, whereas the drowning you experience, the oxygen deprivation. I don't know. So you end up dead either way. So I'm not sure which is worse, but they're both bad.
Okay. Thank you. Denise says, what are your top strategies for people transitioning from a standard diet to an SOS-free diet? Like, would you have them go whole tofu or would you have them maybe be vegan first?
Yeah. So what my strategy would be different than what somebody like Dr. Lyle's strategy might be. He might advocate a more gradual, progressive, step-by-step wise uh, progression towards healthful living. Whereas my feeling would be that it's a lot easier to just stop it. And that's why I like fasting, because it just stops everything and recalibrates. But it's like asking somebody, do you want to just rip the Band-Aid off or do you want to peel it off gently? And I personally would just rip it off, but somebody else might feel like peeling it off is better. I don't really care what you do as long as you end up successful. As long as a year later you have high adherence to a whole plant food SOS-free diet, whether you did it slowly or rapidly, may be academic.
Okay. Hey, you know who's watching? Hey, Rip, how you doing? Rip Esselstyn in the house, and he has a fun question. Why does Alan always dress in black like Johnny Cash?
Well, actually, it started when Chef AJ was critical of me, and you know how sensitive I am. And she said that the only color that I should wear is black because it's the only color that matched my personality. And since then, I haven't worn anything but black. And I found it was actually very convenient because well, that shortly after AJ told me that, Charles Suede had a sale on shirts. And I bought some shirts, and then I realized it was incredibly time saving because I never had to worry if this went with that. And I didn't, as a significant amount of decision making that was reduced. And also by buying just a few high quality shirts, they were able to hold up. And I got tremendous value, and I never had to go shopping, and I never had to annoy my wife by putting on something that was apparently inappropriately contrasting. And so since then, I've just adopted that life simplifying habit.
Right. And you don't have decision fatigue by thinking about what to wear every day.
No, it's tremendous, tremendous. The other thing I did in my life recently that tremendously reduced my stress,
No,
AJ,
no, what?
is I got an autonomous driving automobile. I
Oh
got a
my God.
Tesla Model 3 that has autonomous driving. And, I have a bit of directional dyslexia that's pretty significant. And so I have trouble with navigation. I was an early adopter of the GPS devices, but they're not perfect. But the car is complete. You get in the car, it does everything. It does all your directions. In fact, if you don't pay attention and stuff, it yells at you. I have to like apologize to my automobile while I'm driving. And I went from here to LA and back. I never did a thing. It takes care of everything. It's like having a private chauffeur who's a much better driver than I am and
It,
knows every direction to every place. And it's been really great. I've really enjoyed it. So for anybody with directional dyslexia, it's a really great technology.
well, I was in the car with you driving to San Francisco and I saw you get frustrated and getting lost, but it's not scary. Do you still sit behind the wheel and hold the wheel?
Yeah, you still have to sit behind the wheel and pay attention because otherwise, the grok, who's the name of the driver, will yell at you. And in fact, if you consistently don't pay attention, it'll suspend your auto driving privileges where it refuse to drive for you. I was joking that it does everything. I was driving through a bad neighborhood in LA, it even locked the doors.
Now, but can you drive it like a regular car if you want to?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, sometimes if there's an obstruction in the road or something, it may require that you take control back of the car to make a decision about what you want to do. But even like if a fire truck comes up behind you, it'll pull itself over. It'll do, it knows where all the charging stations are. It's really quite impressive.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have
So
to
yeah, you can still, it still has a steering wheel, so you can still drive it if you decide you want to.
thank you. Colleen, who's watching live, says she has been to True North for a medically supervised fast with Dr. Strucker, and she'd like to now fast at home. Does she need to connect with a doctor there before she does it?
Yes. So whether people fast at home or they fast at the center, the protocol is the same. Number one, we need to make sure you're currently a good candidate for fasting. So that's history, exam, and lab. We need to make sure when you're fasting, you rest and hydrate. So that means you're not going to work, you're not driving a car, you're not putting other people at risk, uh, and that you refeed carefully and following the protocol. Now, all of this information is laid out in our book, Can Fasting Save Your Life, which is written so you know what to do. And also, your physician would know what to do to help you because you'll need a doctor in terms of getting basic lab and being available if there's an issue. The other thing we've begun doing, our attending doctor, Justin Wise, has been doing remote fasting support in conjunction with a local doctor, with the patient's local doctor. And it's been, so far, it's been successful. So if you want to do a fast remotely, I would fill out the registration forms on our website and call and work with Dr. Wise in helping set that up. And he'll provide you coaching, and you can also he'll work with your local doctor in terms of making sure that your doctor's available if issues come up that become a problem and remind you of all the variables. Also, we make our educational programs available freely so people can participate in those remotely as well. So we're trying to approximate the experience of fasting at the center for people that are appropriate candidates at home, but you definitely want to make sure first that you're a good candidate. And Dr. Weiss can help you review your medical history and make sure that that's an option that's good for you. We typically don't do the longer fast for people that are on medications or have significant complications at home. And we don't recommend people fasting at home that aren't able to rest and get the kind of support that they need.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's see who is next. Would fasting help my husband's kidney stones? Asked Jenny. He frequently gets them.
Well, it might actually stimulate them to be passed, which can be very painful. Passing kidney stones is never a pleasant experience. It might help him prevent new stone formation, but it won't necessarily help the body break down the existing stones. Sometimes, if those stones are symptomatic, the nephrologist will use lithotripsy or other methods, even sometimes surgical methods, to remove, obstructive stones and things of that nature. But in terms of preventing you from making new stones, the diet and fasting can be very helpful.
Perfect, thank you. All right. Oh, there's a question about, oh, do you only drink distilled water daily? Asks Danny.
Well, I try to just drink purified water. Sometimes if I forget my bottle and I'm at the club, I'll drink, the filtered water that they have there. But generally, the idea is to drink purified water, whether it's distilled or reverse osmosis or whatever high efficiency method of purification you have available is probably going to get rid of most of the things like chlorine and other hydrogenated halocarbons and other problems that are going to show up in water.
Great, thank you. All right. So, Deborah, who's watching live, says, "What is a good book for first-time fasting?" Just happen to have one
Yeah.
right here.
The best book that I've ever read on fasting is Can Fasting Save Your Life? It really is good. It's built largely on our 22 original studies. It's written by Dr. Tasha Myers, who's really skilled, not only as a writer, but she can make complicated things understandable. Yet it's still written with enough credibility that your physician will understand why you're wanting to fast and not think you're a whack job just because you're discussing it.
Thanks. All right. How can you help a thin bladder wall, and what would help an enlarged prostate? Asks Lily.
Well, an enlarged prostate, is a result of chronic inflammation may be impacted by fasting. In fact, it's interesting, AJ. We've noticed that people with benign prostatic hypertrophy often go from having to wait 5 or 6 times a night or more to 1 or 2 times a night. So we've presumed that this is associated with a reduction in prostate inflammation. But now we're going to be able to prove it because we've added a new medical doctor to our staff, and we're just setting up the equipment to be able to begin doing non-invasive diagnostic ultrasounds at the TrueNorth Health Center. So we'll be able to do ultrasounds on things like prostate volume, bladder function, liver, fatty liver, as well as carotid ultrasounds. So we're going to be able to start looking at these before and after fasting and be able to document the changes that we're seeing with the benefit of modern ultrasound technology. So we're very excited about that. We're setting up a new diagnostic room. Actually, just started talking to the contractor about that. Should be done in a couple of weeks.
Right. And you can get the book on Amazon. You can use the link below and also get it on Dr. Goldhamer's website. So Marcia would like to know if coconut sugar has saturated fat. The label says 0, but I know that things can be labeled as 0, but still have up to a half a gram per serving.
You might know better than me, AJ, but I think coconut sugar is just the sugar component that's been extracted out, and sugar is sugar. So we wouldn't recommend coconut sugar, date sugar, corn sugar, any other kind of fractionated carbohydrate. But I don't believe that there would be any residual fat. It's not like the spam, the spam, what do you call the spray things?
Yeah,
It's
that's
a
like the
100% fat that they label as no fat because the serving size has less than half a gram, so they round it down. A serving size is like 1/60th of a second, which you couldn't even physically do. So it basically you're spraying 100% fat spray on something thinking it's no fat.
But what is wrong with date sugar? It's literally ground dates.
Yeah,
That's
it's sugar. Yeah, it's a hyper concentrated sugar. And so we don't recommend hyper concentrated sugars. We don't even recommend people have multiple dates. We don't tell people to go on 5 dates in a night. They go on 1 date. And so if you're going to have a date, you have a date. You don't have dates. It's too concentrated. It's too much. Unless you're trying to gain weight, there'd be no justification for increasing caloric density. And so what are you putting date sugar on? Stuff that's hyper concentrated you shouldn't be eating to begin with. You shouldn't need added salt or sugar of any kind, including date sugar, if the product you're making isn't a hyper concentrated food product.
but how do you really feel?
You
All right.
get nothing.
You get nothing. Absolutely. Okay. Vi says, how does a whole food diet help to decrease extreme stress? I heard this great discussion before about lifestyle for depression and anxiety.
Well, maybe because you're so busy shopping and chopping and chewing and defecating that you don't have time to engage in all those health compromising behavior patterns. I don't know. It is true, though, people eating this diet spend more time eating and maybe socializing and doing health producing products like preparing food, growing food. Maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe something has to do with the biochemistry of it too, where your blood sugar levels aren't bouncing all over the place because of the effect of refined carbohydrates driving insulin up and then sugar down, and then your brain thinking you're starving, and then you get binging and craving, and then it compromises your self-esteem because you become obese, and you suffer the physiological compromises of having excess fat, and particularly excess visceral fat, producing the inflammation that leads to heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and autoimmune disease.
Um, Speaking about vegans and having to eat more on a low calorie density SOS-free diet, remember the comedian in Vegas that did the bit about how we're always chewing?
It was hilarious. There were
Yeah.
some really funny people.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts, actually.
Yeah,
Okay,
who knew that vegans could have such a good sense of humor?
absolutely. That
I
was
think that was really fun. You had a great comedy show.
that was fun. So, Vi says, but are there any foods that can relieve GERD that's probably caused by stress? Does it matter whether the GERD is caused by stress or other reasons? Are there foods to relieve GERD?
Well, that's a really good point. That some hyperacidity may be associated with stress, and some is associated with stress, dietary stress. Some may be emotional stress. And I would imagine that the causes of hyperacidity, whether they're caused by dietary stress or caused by emotional stress, are best dealt with getting rid of the cause of the problem, which would be to reduce the stress or dissipate the effect of the stress with things like exercise, adequate sleep, and being around people that aren't jerks. And then dietary stress is by adopting a health promoting diet and getting rid of the things that are causing it, the hyperacidity and the other problems. Not the least of which, by the way, is coffee. People drink a lot of these beverages, many of which are really caustic and irritating, not to mention contain a highly addictive nervous system drug, which interferes with the quality of their sleep and definitely increases acid production.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the vegan educators are thinking coffee is very good for us.
Yeah, they're just making a mistake. A lot of vegan educators used to think salt was a really good thing, and they advocated that until it became apparent that they were wrong about that. And many of them have advocated all kinds of pills and potions and powders over the years. So eventually they all, when enough science is out and enough information comes down, they usually come around to reality.
Thank you. A video of 1,000 Nights would like to know, does fasting help with concussions? And if so, how?
Well, what's interesting is that we've had a case we published actually on TBI, traumatic brain injury. This happened to be a dentist who had suffered a traumatic brain injury and suffered 16 years of continuous head pain until she underwent 41 days of fasting, adopted a health promoting diet, followed by another 40 days of fasting, and now has a multi-decade remission from that constant daily head pain. So we've definitely shown that at least some people are able to reduce the inflammation that's associated with the cause of their head pain. And at least in those people, it's been successful.
Thank you. So, one of the viewers on Instagram, they have a great handle, SOS Free Life, asks, what's the most surprising case Dr. Goldhamer has seen?
Wow, I've seen a lot of cases, and a lot of them are surprising. I
Wasn't
think
one
one
of
of the
them?
most surprising, though, was we had a woman in here whose husband was vehemently antagonistic to her coming in. And he was a bit of a drunk. And when she was here, she decided that she'd had enough and she was kicking him to the curb. And she got divorced and went on about her life. And I actually lost track of her. But then about 3 years later, her ex-husband called me up and said that his drinking had gotten out of control and that his life and health were out of control. And he really wanted to come in and try to go through the program. So we brought him in and he told the group about what an asshole he had been and to the point where he lost his wife with his drinking and everything. And he went through the fast and he was doing fine. Well, about 3 weeks in, unbeknownst to me, his ex-wife, who had changed her name, decided to check back into the center. And I didn't know it was her and it was her ex-husband that was here. But anyway, she checked in and make a long story short, he wasn't a drunk anymore, and they reconnected and ended up getting married again.
Well,
And to this day, they think I set it up. And I had
that
no idea, but it just worked out that way.
that's very cool. Wasn't there one patient that came in practically blind and walked out seeing again?
Yeah, Dr. McDougall sent us a woman who was legally blind, and she was too sick and on too many drugs to start fasting right away. But we put her on a very strict SOS-free diet, and she started losing weight, and her blood pressure came down. And ultimately, I think it was about 4 months in, she got her vision back, and it was really impressive. So that was good, and that was actually before we even had a chance to fast her. She had already gotten her vision back.
Wow.
But
That's
if you read our book, Confess and Save Your Life, you'll find all kinds of, carefully documented, published case reports that really are mind-bending. It's amazing what the body can do if you just get out of the way and let it heal itself.
wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Goldhammer.
It's my pleasure, AJ.
Okay, well, send your questions in and he'll get to more of them next month. And please come back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time for Chef Mark Reinfeld making vegan must